Looks like we're live. Welcome back to MythVision podcast. It's been a minute. I should be telling myself that, right? Haven't done a live in what, month and a half, month. So I hope everybody's doing well. I am working away on all sorts of stuff behind the scenes. I'll fill you in on that as we unravel today's live stream. I really wanted to connect with you because it's been a long time. I've been doing these documentaries on the origins of the Bible and really kind of trying to emphasize mythical antecedents where the Bible authors create or got their inspiration for the narratives we read in the Bible. You know, this channel is called MythVision. And people were like, what's the secret code or what's the like hidden meaning? And I was like, when I first came up with the name of this channel, it was to put my vision on the myth and to focus on that part, because I thought this was literally true. I thought Adam and Eve were the literal first people on planet Earth. I thought Cain was the first murderer. I thought that Noah really was on this boat. And then eventually, as I later on in the years tried to find it to be the ice age melting 12,000 years ago that Noah was actually on. And everyone copied the Bible, by the way. So I believe this was the real authentic account, and that, those ridiculous Gilgamesh epics were just full of themselves. Those Mesopotamians, man, they copied the heck out of the Bible. And then the story continues. And I thought everything in there is what actually happened, or at least to some degree happened, because this was true. And then I get to Jesus. And of course, that was literally true. And what I was reading actually happened. So I started saying, okay, there's probably some liberty in esoteric or a way of understanding this that isn't so literal. And maybe that's what the authors meant. While I was still a believer, started to get away from that literalist interpretation. And I started to become what the more conservative Christians say, a liberal thinker, a liberal researcher. I went to these scholars who were more liberal in their approach, whatever the hell that means in academia. This is not politics. This was just Bible study stuff. Our Calvinist brethren would say, get away from the liberal scholars and those Arminians and such. And I started to realize, hold on. What I'm reading in the Bible, in the New Testament, they're recontextualizing text from the scriptures that they had, which were the Hebrew Bible and stuff, the Septuagint mainly, because that's what they're quoting from, a Greek translation of their scriptures. And they recontextualize. They would lift a meaning, even just a single sentence, and then give it a completely new interpretation. And I thought, wow, so they were very liberal in how they interpreted their Bible. Do you mean to tell me this whole time, while I was this conservative who thought this is literally historically true, that Paul himself was changing the original context to his setting? Like he says in Corinthians when he says, you shall not muzzle an ox, and it is written, right? Well, what that really means, brethren, is that, I've been laboring, and the other disciples, the apostles, really, they can marry and they can do this and that. You pay them, but I don't want any of your money. And then he goes on to explain how this ancient text supposedly is actually talking about him and the church, not about actual oxen being muzzled. Several examples you can get into. I've done episodes on this. The point is, I started to think, what do I believe? I'm still a Christian, couldn't let go of the emotions and the psychology that was behind this, but I couldn't believe that it was literally the case anymore. I found other ways of understanding. And then eventually I started questioning that. So it was a little downward step away from where I was. I have a special guest who's going to be joining me today. I figure I'd just let you know, because I don't want to leave him back in the backstage forever. But I have Dr. Richard C. Miller, who's going to be hanging out with me today. I want to go into some stuff, and I hope you do too, because I get excited discovering these interesting, I'm going to call them mythical narratives that are too much in common with our Bible. And we got to get into this. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest. There's no reason in leaving him hanging. He's my brother. Dr. Richard C. Miller, welcome back, my friend.
Hey, Derek. Good to be here.
Hey, I always appreciate you, man. Look, you are a wonderful host. You put me and my wonderful wife over there at your house. We had a great time. We did a lot of recordings. It made some noise. It's still making noise. We found ourselves on William Lane Craig's podcast, actually.
Yeah, we're making waves. I think I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten and people jumping onto my author page on Facebook and stuff. I've actually made quite a few friends along the way as well. So
I tell you, it's interesting. You were hesitant when we first met. You're like, I don't know, but like I read your work and I said, okay, anyone who's interested in understanding New Testament really needs, the best way I could put it is, needs to place this Greek New Testament literature in its milieu, looking at the cultural topos, the historical cultural understanding of Greek and Roman and Hellenistic Jews, really Jews, period. Look at Josephus, how he has Moses ascend. The scripture says he dies and gets buried by God somewhere. Like we don't know where. People are guessing, but it leaves you hanging. Well, why did Josephus add this little, and it wasn't just Josephus, Philo of Alexandria did this. Or we were talking about this before we hit record, how they're competing with the existing world and creating these narratives, having Moses ascend. And your book does place, I think, this literature and its signals, as you talk about in your book, in that context. And if you don't know that Greek and Roman literature and what they're saying and how they understand these things, you get to the New Testament, you're going to be like trying to read this literal historical approach that it actually happened as it said or something. I don't know. It's weird.
right. No, it gets kind of historically gets stripped out of that ancient context, that vibrant world, and of where all sorts of stories were being told and they meant different things in that context, gets pulled out of that context. And where do we find it now? We're in churches where people are playing pipe organs and standing up and reciting creeds and having, it's very, very different, reading, singing hymns or whatever, completely alien context to that ancient world. And so these stories are registering in very different ways. And on top of that layer cake, people are demanding or expecting pastors, ministers, religious leaders that everyone take this completely literally, at least it's in some context. And so, and the last holdout, I mean, it's hard to even find this even in a liberal church where you have to take the resurrection literally. If you let go of everything else, that's the last stand, right? That's the Alamo or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's peculiar in my research as I got back into there, just letting go of the modern kind of feud and fuss over everything. You go back into the ancient texts and even what the earliest Christians were saying about them, that kind of posture just wasn't present there. And the meanings behind these texts were certainly not the case that, in terms of what people are thinking now. And so
your book, oh man, again, I have it over here. Let me plug. I think it's only fair that I plug. Let me plug. Where am I at? Did I just lose myself? Here we go. Share screen. I'll be getting to the Patreon, the super chat questions here shortly. I got your book pulled up here on Amazon just so people know what it looks like. Go type in Richard C. Miller, Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity. Now, this episode that we're doing right now, this live stream, it's a freestyle. I kind of have some things I'd like to discuss and also go into some sources. But I also figure, why not mention some of the work that I've been working on lately, Dr. Miller? And I know this is something you probably haven't had time to really watch some of these documentaries because they feel kind of like ancient aliens in the way that they're kind of like, I'm ripping into that same area that's getting a lot of views. So a lot of people are like, what's up with these titles? I'm sick of your titles. If my title bugs you, go look at my most professional, educated, scholarly title. Find out how many views that title gets with that thumbnail. Then go look at these documentaries, watch them, judge the content, scratch the title and the thumbnail for a second, watch them, and see how sophisticated, educated, scholarly, deep into the weeds they go and how many views they get. And you'll see why I'm trying to get a much larger audience to pay attention to what we're doing. Because if you go look at a lot of these Christian apologist channels that have a lot of views and a lot of attention, they also some excellent editing and things like that. They're getting some big views and it's super sensational. Like one guy, I can't remember his name. I was trying to find it earlier for Neil, but one guy was saying they recorded the trumpets from Revelation. The sounds are being recorded across the world. Like, and hundreds of thousands of views in a few days. And I'm going, this is ridiculous. Like, people are being convinced, you know what I mean? Like, what in the world? It's silly stuff to me. So I'm like trying to give them real educated scholarly material, historical research and stuff. And the work I'm doing is just, I'm diving deep into characters throughout the Bible, trying to find you what I think makes the most sense as like a, where they're getting the inspiration for that narrative from.
Yeah, it's exciting, the work that you're doing. You really are, I think, taking it to the next level in terms of your presentation, broadening your audience, and yet keeping that academic scholarly rigor right along with it, and also continuing to offer the same sorts of content that you've traditionally had that has attracted so many of your likes and subscribes. And so, bravo, man, you're doing a good job.
Trying to
really
do
excited.
It's not easy to do both the interviews and the documentaries. I'm trying to find a system that is efficient, but also affordable and yet do both. And so I'm like right now in a tough rut because just, I guess, personal information. I got my brother and his wife to go to treatment and to rehab to help themselves because they've been struggling with addiction. And so that's been like a real, like, difficult time, energy draining kind of thing. And that we succeeded. And so now it's just like, come on, you guys can do it. But, you know, anyway, that's a whole different rabbit trail I don't want to get lost in. I want to confess that when I research Old Testament scholarship and stuff, there's not a lot on Greek parallels, Greek connections literarily. There are some people. And as I've been looking, I was thinking maybe I'll find them and then it'll be some quack stuff that doesn't ever mention or show the Mesopotamian, Ugaritic, Canaanite, Phoenician, things like that. And the people who are actually seeing the Greek stuff are also highlighting the other mythological antecedents. So they're not like Greek supremacists and it's only coming from the Greek world. They're like saying, hey, it looks like the composition of the Bible is later than we think. And yes, you've got the Tower of Babel, very ziggurat sounding Mesopotamian, piece of furniture in this literature. However, there are elements that are in the Genesis account and throughout the narrative structure of the Hebrew Bible that come from nowhere in the ancient world but Greece or the Greek writings that we find. Like, take the genealogy in Genesis. That genealogy of nationalistic individuals, people that represent nations in a genealogical form post-flood, like Deucalion, there's nowhere in Mesopotamia that has that. You have the Sumerian kings list, but they're not national genealogies of individuals who represent nations post-flood the way that you see the Greek world does with Deucalion. And Deucalion's son is the first one who plants a vineyard. Well, Noah's the first one who plants a vineyard. Like, you start going, what's happening here? And so my documentary series is showing you, just laying it out. And I can't wait to drop the next two that I've been working on.
That's so exciting. Yeah, I think that, well, I think what we're finding is you've got a culture there that is competing alongside much larger cultures and civilizations in the ancient world, and probably is anxious about that. There's an interest to gentrify or to keep up to date their myth systems with the larger cultural kind of marketplace that's out there and with their neighboring civilizations. And Greece, they led the way in so many ways, and so everybody was kind of measured against them at some point, especially as they rose to prominence. and in the Hellenistic period particularly. And so it's interesting. I think the puzzling question there is to answer who wrote these texts and when and why and under what payroll.
Yeah.
Yeah, who was sanctioning this? In terms of the political structures of the time. And so it really raises a whole number of questions that fall way outside of what traditional biblical studies is even explored for the most part.
Absolutely. I feel like there's still like Wellhausen influence, like Wellhausen, with the documentary hypothesis kind of approach. And we're getting more critical in that vein of documentary hypothesis. But it's like, we're getting to a point now where I think we're willing to ask questions that break out of the traditional scholarly guild. My father's father taught, in the field of scholarship, and they kind of stick into that. I think some of these guys that are challenging the status quo, that's what I'm examining. I'm pushing the boundaries. I understand a lot of it is not consensus, but what is that? But a lot of people who are in agreement on a certain idea, because I'm not saying there isn't some validity to some of the arguments that are made, but it's messier than I think. And, this goes with like the Q questions, things like that, but I say all that to say to the audience, stay tuned in terms of the upcoming stuff. I do appreciate everybody. It's been a tough couple weeks with family trying to help with their illness here, the disease of addiction, and helping them with that. We have some documentaries coming out, and I'm also going to keep doing these interviews. We're also still doing courses. Next year, I'm going to be leading a tour in Israel with Neil, and other scholars are going to be there. So I hope to see you there. This work I'm doing, Dr. Miller, I feel fits hand in glove into what you did. And why not play a clip real quick from a Christian apologist friend of mine? I just recently was highlighted about they mentioned me, and I think you'll have some fun with it. You want to do that?
Let's do it.
All right. Just stay tuned. I'm going to get your super chats here. Constellation Pegasus, I see you. Thank you for the support, my friend. All right. Let me stop screen share and then share it so that it'll actually play through the screen. My buddy here, Eric Manning from Testify. He said, why atheists should reconsider Christianity. And then I think he said in the thumbnail something like they need to do better. But this is an interesting part because my friend Eric like literally believes almost everything is. I'm not going to put in words in his mouth, but I'd say an extremely high percentage in the New Testament he would say is what actually happened as it's described in that account. So, he might say wiggle room. I don't say everything, but extreme amounts. So let's hear him expound here.
Here's another one that Bart Ehrman used in the same debate with Justin Bass. He said Lucian of Samosata tells the story of Peregrinus Proteus, a philosopher who purportedly immolated himself at the Olympic Games, and witnesses claim to have seen a phoenix rising from the ashes the next day. But this account is very fuzzy and it's open to interpretation. Okay. And so I don't think this is a very good, comparison in the case where Bart Ehrman is concerned with the resurrection of Jesus, where he's saying, touch me, handle me, right? He's eating broiled fish with them and they know him and spent 3 years with him. And he spent a period of 40 days with him, reportedly. Okay.
All right. Got to pause. Now, Miller, we've just been stumped.
Checkmate.
Checkmate, man. What do we do from here, brother?
Yeah, I think it's so there's only, I wish that he would have read the entire account or some larger portions of it or something like that. He left out a whole lot there. So you've got in 165, this is pretty much a historical artifact at this point. Proteus Peregrinus he's a philosopher at that time. He had, and this is an interesting fact that's not raised there, he had been previously a teacher of the Christians. And not just a teacher of the Christians, he had been one of the foremost teachers of the Christians. In fact, compared to almost a second Christ or even a second Socrates. So they were heralding this guy as a high up figure within the echelon of early Christian tradition in the 2nd century. 165. Okay, so this guy deconverts, becomes a kind of a cynic philosopher in some ways, and is giving teaching there on the road on the way to Athens near the Olympic Games in 165. Right, he had set this up as a staged event. He was going to throw himself into this big bonfire in front of the crowds, and so he'd advertise this as a thing, and so people were coming to come see this crazy stunt. Well, in the ancient world, to us, it seems like a crazy stunt, and it should. To them, it was seen as an exhibition of his ascesis, of his ascetical devotion. His philosophy had achieved such great such a great maturity that even he was not afraid even of death. And so that is basically the height of that's what Socrates, when he drinks his hemlock, that he's not afraid even to die, that his philosophy had matured to that level. And so this would have been viewed in some circles, at least in the ancient world, as an impressive kind of exhibition of his philosophical sophistication. To us, it seems crazy. So anyway, he's got disciples there standing by. Now Lucian is writing it. You're the person, I've never seen this person before, but he says it's fuzzy or something like this. Well, the thing that I think makes it interesting, actually, what he's calling fuzzy is what I think makes it interesting is Lucian is a critic of Proteus. He's a critic of the Christians. He's a critic of this guy in particular because he sees him as a charlatan, and he's a critic of this stunt that takes place. And so you've got somebody who's writing basically from that standpoint, from almost a satirical standpoint. He's famous for satire, and so Lucian he's one of my favorite writers in the ancient world, actually. Anyway, so he's writing about this, and there's more to it than this. So it talks about how he's hesitant, doesn't want to throw himself in, and then finally he just does. Okay, so he throws himself into the fire. There's a huge crowd there gathered. The folks that wanted to go and attend the Olympic Games, went to go see the spectacle as well. And so, anyway, so the next day, or like a day, I think it's like so 2 days later, I think they're having the panegyric, and this is like a funeral service where people are getting up and saying things. Now, what he quotes there is that as he threw himself in, some people reported that they saw a vulture or some sort of a bird fly out of the fire, and it calls out with a voice, "To Olympus I go," or something like this. Right. So he's going off to basically the heaven of that time period. They had moved. Olympus was basically almost like it's the same thing as heaven. In the they had already investigated that mountain and realized that there was nothing there. And so the gods. So basically, it's kind of a figure of speech. He's going to be with the gods. Okay.
Almost like another realm, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But, he's being translated.
Right.
It's his apotheosis, right? It's his ascension. And so someone comes to the funeral that day and says, "I saw him in Athens at the portico of the Seven Voices walking. I saw Proteus, the translated raised Proteus, resurrected figure, walking in the portico of the Seven Voices with a garland of olive and a gleaming white toga." And so they give this, and of course Lucian is bringing that out as this is baloney. Yeah. This is them wanting to give honor. Basically, this goes right into my thesis in so many ways. They're trying to honor him in his funeral by saying, "Hey, I saw him." This is their way of trying to install him in the Hall of Fame. And Lucian is a cynic and a critic of this figure, but Aulus Gellius was one of his great fans, another great writer in the ancient world. And so if you look up Aulus Gellius, he writes highly of Proteus Peregrinus and thinks he is one of the greatest philosophers ever. And so just because Lucian didn't like him, that does not mean that he didn't have that he was for lack of fans and people that admired and venerated him. And that's what's going on at this funeral, is his devotees and so forth are stepping forward and saying, he's ascended to heaven. He is now translated to be among the gods. He's not going down to Hades. He did not go down to Hades like most people. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, so to speak. along with Heracles and along with all the other greats, and so and the Caesars and so forth. And so this was it was an eyewitness testimony. You've got a post-resurrection appearance. You've got a guy that's imitating in so many ways. He came out of the Christian tradition, and he's trying to do what, to him, this is what he saw. It really casts an interpretive light on the way this particular historical figure interpreted what had happened with Jesus in his own kind of rise to iconic significance in the Mediterranean world. This guy's trying to pull off the same thing,
Right.
almost like a stuntman in some ways. And so it really kind of gives an interpretive echo in kind of that cultural chamber of what was going on, and the way these kind of stories registered in the ancient psyche and mind of the time.
Wow, there's so much to say there. I think exploring that further is worth doing for anyone who's like, he was a Christian. Now, you come from a certain theology. He was never truly one of us if he was, that kind of thing. But this guy knew the teachings. He understood that. Obviously, it didn't grab or stick in that respect, but he did end up with this martyrology, which does have common thread within Christendom, and yet the Greek, not only just Greek, but pagan, what we like to call pagan, which has become pejorative. You don't like using it, and neither do many of the scholars, but you get what I'm saying. Non-Christian philosophies, they also willing to die the whole nine for their particular philosophy. And you mentioned this in your book, that the earliest literature that we see, Mark and Luke for sure, have no atonement model. You see it in Matthew, but it kind of has more of a seemingly Jewish aspects to it that would have like sacrificial, what we see in the Old Testament. But in Mark and Luke, it's more martyrological about how to follow and act to your death, with a noble death at the end. In Luke, no fear, no nothing, like Socrates, give me the cup and face your death like a man, that kind of thing. So, and I've read your articles, stuff like that on there, but I figured I'd add that in there to make the point. This argument apologists make all the time is that, well, they were willing to die, and would you die for something you don't believe in? And I almost, go ahead.
Well, just to comment on that, I mean, you're correct. In Luke Acts, there is no death for sins theology there. You don't find it. So what's going on? You get almost like a compendium of different martyrological tales. Jesus figures prominently in that. He's a major figure, obviously, a kind of a foremost character within the storylines. But several people are going, and in fact, it ends with Paul on his way to Rome, and the implication is he's also going to die. And so it's what's often described. You see it in lots of times even in the chat or the comment section behind some of the videos that we put together. Who would die for a lie? You get this argument, it just recurs over and over again. Who would die for a lie? Well, they weren't dying for lies. They were dying in because they were to express their dedication. It's very alien to us, the ascetical dimensions of the early Christians. Who would eat bugs? Who would cut off their genitals? Who would live in caves for years? Who would, you could fill in all of those, and just because of their ascetic. And so in some ways, I think it's a truism that martyrdom was the supreme manifestation of ascesis. That is your own renunciation of the world in the face, and usually as a spectacle in front of Caesar. You wouldn't die in obscurity out in the woods somewhere. You wanted to die as a spectacle, and even more than that, you wanted to have it written up forever and embellished and told as some kind of great deed. And so Justin Martyr, for instance, a lot of people look to him and think, oh, well, he was a martyr. How could he not believe this stuff? Well, he was in debate with other philosophers, and he was understood. If you go into Eusebius and read his martyrdom account, it's him being basically an asshole. Excuse my language. He was he was treating other philosophers in ways that were inappropriate, and calling them out. And you've got even a quotation in there if you go and read Eusebius, and what he goes ahead and preserves the kind of the writings and stuff that Justin Martyr had given. He was debating a cynic philosopher who had ties into the political world, and was basically shaming this guy and calling him a fraud and all these kinds of things. And eventually, because it started to upset enough people that were in political power, it was almost like death by cop. And so he was provoking. And so you find this a lot with a lot of the early Christians, this kind of provocation, where they're just not playing nice with the existing people and powers that be, and get themselves killed. They just ratchet it up and keep ratcheting it up and ratcheting it up until finally, they end up getting themselves killed. And so that's kind of what happened with him. I mean, I think he was an interesting philosopher. Some people say that he tried to become I believe it was a cynic originally, failed, and then decided, okay, well, I'm going to try and write for the Christians now. He's heralded now as kind of the grandfather of the apologetic tradition, but he was not. He got killed not because he was taking this great historical stand on the claims of his religion, but because he was mistreating other philosophers in his day that were more prominent and powerful. And finally, that came around it got to the ear of Caesar at the time, and Caesar said enough. And in that world, it wasn't like freedom of speech like we have now.
Yeah. I was going to bring up an example, something that comes to mind. I have a friend, obviously I'm not naming names, but it's important. I help drug addicts a lot, people who are struggling with addiction, drugs, things like that, because I have a past overcoming it. And a friend of mine who also struggles with both addiction and mental health issues went missing. In fact, went missing for 4 or 5 days. We started thinking that we thought the worst at that time. And so we called the cops to report a missing person, and they wanted some details. I did not know the law and how police work on this, but when we gave them the information and we told them that he also has pre-existent mental health issues, that he has been in mental wards before, that he has mentioned in the not too distant past, he's suicidal. The cops said, well, I hate to break it to you, we won't be looking for him. And I'm like, he's missing. They said, far too often, I live in Washington State, far too often there is suicide by cop, and they force cops to kill them. So there is this behavior in which they make the cop who is out there looking for them, they'll violently even approach them in order to get them to kill. And you reminded me of something you showed me not too long ago. I need to share this before we continue with my friend's thing. And that is the church father Ignatius. Ignatius wrote a letter to the Romans, as you pointed it out. I did an entire video actually showing this, but let's zoom in for people to see. Greetings, Ignatius, who is also called the Aphorus. Now, when is this again? The Ignatius is 3rd, 4th century?
Oh, he's very early. He's like about 110 or 115.
Ignatius? I was thinking he was later. So he's pretty early.
No, he's one of the apostolic fathers. He's one of the earliest ones, right after Clement, basically, and right around Polycarp.
Got it. So he just greetings to the church in Rome. He goes, do not save me from martyrdom, for it is not my desire to act towards you. I'm saying, I think this is like death by cop, suicide by cop kind of thing. What I'm seeing you say based on Justin Martyr and like also this, because in this letter, if you go on to read, it gets gruesome. He says, let me be like the grinded food in the belly of the beast, right? So look here. It says, I am the wheat of God. Let me be ground by the teeth of wild beasts, that I may be found the pure bread of Christ. Rather entice the wild beasts, that they may become my tomb. Notice what he's saying there. Entice the wild beast, that they may become my tomb, and may leave nothing of my body, so that when I have fallen asleep in death, I may be no trouble to anyone. A scholar wrote a book called something to do with the death cult, like Christianity is a death cult. And this is not like some out to get Christianity academic. He just points out how like it literally is exactly how I kind of portrayed myself. I hated my body, the struggle I had with lust and all the addictions in the world that I struggled with. I hated this body when I was a Christian. I struggled with that. The thing I don't want to do, I do. And that whole thing, I had this real big problem. And I wondered why. And it goes right back to kind of Pauline theology of this idea of the flesh, and I guess you could call it in a way Platonic, right? It has some senses that seem to be Platonic.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of respect for the human body, and that you're correct. It goes outside of even Christianity. Christianity just almost radicalizes that in so many ways. But there were other groups, and asceticism was a larger wave that Christianity was riding. It didn't really define it or start it, but it definitely came to dominate that as it rose to significance and prominence in late antiquity and so on. And so the mistaken viewpoint that so many have when they look at this is they think that these early martyrs were dying for the set of historical propositions. No, they weren't dying for Christ. They were dying like Christ. They wanted to die like Paul. They wanted to die like Peter. And so they were modeling or emulating those figures, and they felt like that was their show, their way of showing their dedication or devotion to the movement and its philosophical kind of stature. And so in Eusebius refers to Justin Martyr, says that he was a great philosopher. He's describing him as a philosopher, not as someone who's it's almost like people think that these people that Justin and the others had this historical case, almost like what modern apologists, like they were walking around with, I don't know, Hal Lindsey or C.S. Lewis or something in their mind. And it just it's, or whoever, you fill in the blank, William Lane Craig, they had this kind of this system of argumentation. It was not a historical system. This was a belief system. And that was their posture toward it. And they used these stories to enhance their philosophical praxis. And so that they could achieve more and this shouldn't surprise anyone that studies other religions that have any philosophical dimension to them, like say Buddhism. They're chock full of stories. And the idea is that those stories they're almost like ladders to get you to deeper philosophical kind of achievement. Right. They're not meant to be taken in this hard literal sense. And that's the same thing. You don't get the historiological cases that you would think would be just dominating the early Christian thought world. There's just absent this case for the resurrection. Just, you don't see it anywhere. You'd think that would be going on all the time if that was their linchpin idea for their movement and ideology and dedication. Why isn't that being talked about constantly throughout all of their texts? And it's just not there to be found. They're allegorizing, they're constructing philosophical positions. You read the Didache, it's full of all sorts of praxis, teachings of the way. Sermon on the Mount is, again, it's full of praxis. And they're using these beliefs or myths in order to enhance their ability to practice.
As Dennis McDonald said in a debate with Mike Lacona, who I actually respect. I like Mike, but he's a Christian apologist. He said, I think it's the 95% of the Gospels, which is like the sayings and the teachings and the lessons and stuff like that, that inspired the 5%. You're dying on this 5% of like, well, Jesus got crucified, and then there's this narrative of him resurrecting. But instead, it's the life and teaching stuff that was really what inspired those legends about him that Dennis is trying to say. And of course, I think Mike thinks the resurrection is what inspires the ultimate. I mean, sure, it's the teachings too, but it's like the ultimate thing to him is this resurrection, because Paul says if he's not raised, we have this kind of Protestant. This is how we have to believe. One comment real quick. John D mentioned Ignatius was on his way to die when he wrote that. I don't know if it necessarily follows he intended to get himself killed or, in that situation. Whether he did or didn't, in here, from Syria, even unto Rome, I fight with beasts, both by land and sea, both by night and day, being bound to 10 leopards. I mean a band of soldiers who even when they receive benefits show themselves all the worse, but I am the more instructed by their injuries to act as a disciple of Christ, yet I am not thereby justified, 1 Corinthians 4:4. May I enjoy the wild beasts that are prepared for me, and I pray that they may be found eager to rush upon me, which also I will entice to devour me speedily and not deal with me as some whom out of fear they have not touched. But if they be unwilling to assail me, I will compel them to do so. So like
Right.
he is begging to die. This is not just like I'm stuck, I'm a prisoner, holy crap. He's like give it to me. And I want it the worst. I want to be in the belly of the beast, ground up in their teeth. Like it's pretty hardcore. So I just wanted to highlight that. Did you want to add anything before we continue hearing what he had to say? And then I want to get into some of these super chats because there's so much stuff.
Well, yeah, they're fetishizing this. You can see there. I mean, think of this, the texture of someone's psychology that's in that mind frame. What's going on there? That's completely alien to any modern Christian that I've ever met. I've never met somebody we would call it in if we met somebody that was talking like that. That would be, you'd want to call social workers or something.
Yeah.
So it's alien to us, but to them, you got to see it within their time, their mentality. They're skipping meals. They're not, they're even, some of them are self-flagellating. They're treating their bodies they're using their bodies as one scholar I studied under, a guy that Vincent Wimbush, who was basically maybe the top scholar in the world in asceticism. And one of the things he talked about there, oftentimes he would say they're using their own bodies as a battleground. And it was kind of it's very different in the mentality that we have today in so many areas of Christianity. You see some austerity in, say, the Eastern Orthodox and Catholic traditions, but not it's this degree of it, though, you just don't find it. And so it's very, very rare in the modern world. And so it's often extremely alien, especially to North American, the kind of Christianity that we're used to seeing here, where it's very self-indulgent.
God wants you to have mansions. Be a billionaire.
Yeah. There's one text that was talking about this guy that was living out in a hole in the ground out in the Judean desert, and he would pop up and then go back down in the hole again, almost like things like cuckoo. And so they'd walk by every day and they'd see this guy. And what was funny, because in this doctoral seminar I took, we're talking about, well, why is that? Well, it's not that they're there, it's that they want you to see that they're there. And so
it's a humble way of showing yourself and getting attention.
It's a social statement. And the Cynic philosophers, they were considered the dogs. These are people that deliberately, willfully lived out in the street like dogs and renounced everything. I'm kind of like Jesus talking about your father cares for the birds. He's going to care for us. And he's walking around like a vagrant, but picking people's wheat and stuff like that, and just kind of going day by day and figuring out. And they'd left their careers behind. And and John the Baptist eating bugs and all this stuff down by the Jordan River. It's just alien to the modern thought. And but in the ancient world, these would have been seen as impressive displays of ascesis.
I want to continue because there's something my good friend here, Eric, says, and hopefully someone shares this with him. If not, I'll share it with him after so he can see our little response here. The fun part begins here.
So what about belated reports? When the first event or first report of a said miracle comes long after the event, we have some serious reasons to be skeptical. Examples: the ascension of Romulus was first reported by Tacitus 800 years after the alleged event. Okay, skeptics, stop throwing Romulus out there. I think this one came up. Derek, I love you. You remember our conversation. This came up with a conversation with Derek of the MythVision podcast. He's probably not watching, but just in case you are, don't use Romulus. Like, the first report was Tacitus. It was 800 years after the event. Like, no, this is a belated report. Apollonius, going back to our buddy Apollonius. Well, Philostratus was writing 100 years after he was dead.
I want to pause and go ahead and stop there and just want to kind of correct the record, because I reached out to you right away. I already thought, hold on, this is already factually wrong. I mean, we're not denying that the Romulus lore, myth, legend, whatever, is like very old, and like the writings are much later. Nobody's denying that. Okay. We even have like lives of Alexander the Great that are written much later. Okay. And they may be based on stuff that's earlier, but you in your book talk about Livy and Livy. We even pulled up a few sources here that I figure we could get into. One of those, just to show our audience, is Dionysius of Halicarnassus. Dionysius is right here just to show people, BC character here. All right. This guy's writing in the 1st century BC. Tacitus is later. So factually, you're wrong about that. Again, we agree these are later, but they're based on earlier stuff. And you get into some of that. You told me pull up book 2 here, which is in Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Roman Antiquities, book 2. At the very end of it, others say that while haranguing the people, he was slain by the new citizens of Rome, and they undertook the murder at the time when the rain and the darkness occurred, the assembly of the people being then dispersed, and their chief left without his guard. And for this reason, they say the day on which this happened. He's giving a rationalist perspective, really a post-Julius Caesar perspective, about how, and I love that about your book, by the way, you highlight, about how Romulus was killed. But then it goes on to talk about the view of those who make gods of mortal men and place the souls of illustrious persons in heaven. For they say that at that time, when his mother was violated, it goes on, Romulus pretty much is this god man. And he's also found in Livy after these immortal achievements, which is before Tacitus. Romulus held a review of his army at the Capri Palace. I don't know if I pronounced that right. In the campus of Martyrdom, a violent thunderstorm suddenly arose and enveloped the king in so dense a cloud he was quite invisible to the assembly. From that hour, Romulus was no longer seen on earth. When the fears of the Romans' youth were allayed by the return of bright, calm sunshine after such fearful weather, they saw that the royal seat was vacant, whilst they fully believed the assertion of the senators who had been standing close to him, that he had been snatched away to heaven by a whirlwind. Still, like men suddenly bereaved, fear and grief kept them for some time speechless. At length, after a few had taken the initiative, the whole of those present held Romulus as a god, the son of a god, the king and father of the city Rome. They put up supplications for his grace and favor and prayed that he would be propitious. How do you pronounce that? Propitious to his children.
Propitious, yeah.
Yeah, there's two views. He's torn limb from limb, tucked away in the Senate's clothes, and run away. But later, you have an eyewitness saying, "Hey, he appeared to me." He says, "Hey,
Right.
go and tell the Romans."
I think you're. I don't know who this fella is, but I think he's mistaken in terms of his understanding of what even we're bringing forward. So Romulus is brought forward as basically an archetype alongside Heracles. He could say the same thing about Heracles. Oh, that's a long time ago. Yeah, it was. That does not diminish anything here in terms of the importance, in terms of what we're saying historically, that these were used as archetypes or templates for later apotheosis and translation accounts. And so, yeah, Romulus is early, but that's because he's the guy that's used as a template for all the ones that after that. Everything that's early is early. And so that doesn't really change what we're talking about. Now, the ones that are contemporary, like the one we just talked about with Proteus Peregrinus, that was the same. That was 2 days later that people are coming forward and saying that, reporting, and this was public knowledge. And Lucian is writing maybe a decade later.
What about the Caesars? While we're on this whole
Caesar, again, this was all public, right out in the Colosseum there, in the Forum. They would bring during the funeral, they would bring out his body, and someone would step forward. They'd have it. They basically burn a wax effigy so that they wouldn't have the bones there to be able to, just like Heracles. So there would be there wouldn't be any remains, and therefore, because what would the remains mean? That would mean clearly mortal, right? And so, and they would have someone step forward. I think this Livius Gemminus was a guy that kept repeatedly would see that he's talked about in Seneca as having come forward. I think he's on the Roman payroll actually. He would come forward and say, give confession that he had seen the raised Caesar out on the Via Appia. And so he repeated. In fact, when it was Claudius, Claudius was actually hobbling. This was after he died. The resurrected Claudius is walking on the Via Appia, which was their most famous road in the Italian peninsula. A lot of people have heard of the Via Appia, probably a lot of your viewers. Well, he was seen walking on there, and this is again following along the lines of the Julius Proculus legend that goes back to Romulus.
Right.
Romulus is the archetype for that kind of story pattern. And what they're doing is that's the protocol for installing someone into the Hall of Fame, into the divine cap. This isn't someone that's going down to Hades. This is somebody that's going to be celebrated and remembered and immortalized in the cultural mind of the time. And that was their protocol, was to deify them, to put them up in lights forever. And so it was either that or, so that was exaltatio memoriae, that their memory was going to be exalted. And that's what that implied, was translation, or damnatio. And so some of the emperors were damned, and so their statues were defaced, and they were told, horrible fate for them. And they would go down into Hades, according to the storytellers, and be treated with shame and ignobility. And so that was a way to compel the ruler to rule well and not be a tyrant, because they wanted an exalted kind of memory in the legacy. And so the idea that there's this big gap, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? These people that haven't studied these topics that are trying to make I think the argument, and this is what I remember of it before I had even gotten into these topics, the idea was a legend can't occur unless there's hundreds of years that have passed. No. With apotheosis, the legend is instant, because it's a protocol. They know the pattern. They know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to exalt them right then and there. And so if somebody had died that was a great figure, especially if they couldn't recover their remains, sometimes that was even deliberate to make sure that they couldn't recover the remains. And if they were somebody that was going to be signified and it's the highest level, then that legend would be immediate. And the impression was, hey, this was somebody that's being exalted among the highest of the benefactors of the classical Mediterranean world. And so there are many instances of that. You could go into my book there. I get upwards to 100.
I was just going to say the Proteus.
Yeah, Romulus is one, but this idea, it's kind of like they want to just shoo away the argument like it's made out of, I don't know, it's a paper tiger or something, or a leaky dike, they just want to put their finger in it. No, this is a deluge. This is a storm surge. There's a lot of evidence here, and it's a lot bigger than even me. There are other
these are all figures in alphabetical order in your chapter 2. You list over 100 in the Greek Roman world, in antiquity and somewhat contemporaneous, Caesars, the whole nine, that have like missing body tropes, enveloped by a cloud, ascended up to heaven. In some cases, we talked about this in one of my other episodes. We talked about the poet. What was it? It was written in the 1st century. Literally has an empty tomb narrative, and I can't think of it right now. My head is mush. Yeah, I would say Kalihari, because that's how. But Kalihari,
pronounced 100 ways. But yeah, that's a really insightful. It's just one more garden variety example, but it's very insightful.
And like people get angry at me, Rick, when I bring it up, because I'm like, look, I'm not saying that the gospel authors borrowed from Kalihari or Kalihari borrowed from the gospels. I could imagine Christians trying to make the argument of that way, because they would want it to be like, no, you guys just copied or from us. But it's like you're talking about, if we want to understand how they were thinking about this in a narrative form, get the body to go missing. And we even took your hypothesis to a next level. Suppose that the burial is historical. It's a memory. Let's just pretend for the sake of argument, because you lean in the legendary route, but let's just go with, because you found all the other legends. I mean, we're going to say they all also had historical memory, but you look at that and you go, okay, would they have cause in your estimation? I'm asking you, the guy who's been sifting through this stuff for 20, 30 years, you literally like had to leave your particular faith bubble you had in order to come to these things. And it really shattered your worldview, because you were being fair and open and honest and realizing, how can I truly sit here and say, this one's true, and all of this, now that I'm a classicist researching this is not. This did not happen for them, but this one happened for my guy. You were being honest. And so question is, if he really was buried and this is a historical memory, just for argument's sake, do you think there's good enough reason for the disciples to steal his body?
Well, yeah, I think that's a viable hypothesis. I've even considered writing something on that at some point. I may still. That's the alternative account, and some of these others had alternative accounts. With Romulus, the senators tore him in pieces. Oh, is that what happened? And they hit parts of his body in the folds of their togas or whatever, their garments, their robes. Is that what happened? Or did he ascend in with a thunderclap into the clouds and his body was translated to divinity? Which one was it? And in Matthew, you get the two accounts as well. You get the story about with the soldiers and all of this, and that the disciples had come by night and stolen his body. Okay, and that story doesn't go away. If you go to Justin Martyr's writing to Trypho, 2nd century, Trypho's a Jewish authority at that time, a major figure, and he's saying that, according to Trypho, he's saying that what the Jewish story is on this, they're all saying that the body got stolen, that this didn't go away. It just became a more circulated kind of description. And in fact, it expands it and says even the Romans are saying the same thing. And so only the Christians are the ones still peddling the idea, that it was otherwise. And so everyone else is reflecting on this. And so when you go to the reception of the story, one of the things I did that was mistaken, I think, with my book, I'm willing to confess, is I said, resurrection and reception in early Christianity. Well, the reception was outside of early Christianity too. It was how did the Romans receive it? How did the other Jewish groups receive it? And so that's also part of the reception of this. And so, but if you go back there and take a look at it, you think, well, okay, why would they have stolen the body? Well, because they need the bones gone. And so there's a whole trend, actually. I've got several in my article and in the book as well, of individuals who sought to feign translation, in other words, deliberately die in such a way that their remains couldn't be found so that they could be deified.
Right.
And Empedocles is one of those. Alexander the Great is another one. And then there's a whole list of others as well. And this would fall into that. And I would even argue that this whole deal with Proteus Peregrinus throwing himself into the flames during the Olympic Games falls into that. I think that was a staged event. I think his disciples, everything, I think that was all set up a certain way for him to go out with a bang. And so in this situation, you just killed our guy. They probably had it, and you got to realize that we're looking at this, they were, after the fact, with Christianity winning out. And so the peculiarities of it and the randomness of some of these things, but his disciples in this particular case, had an opportunity then by night, a few of them, the top, his closest, sidekicks, had a chance to get in there and take the body away and then raise the story up. That's a completely viable hypothesis. I would say that there's a pretty good chance that that's exactly right.
I'm going to throw out something interesting too. I just thought of this. I never really tried to think this way. I'm blaming you for these great thinking ideas for book that needs to be written. But let's pretend, for sake of argument again, because we have no way of knowing with certainty on any of this. Let's just pretend that part of the Sanhedrin, we have this Joseph of Arimathea figure, and he goes and tries to have this honorable burial. If this guy really is, and I think this is narrative literature, but if this guy really is in there burying Jesus, he could have played a significant role in also having him go missing. So here you have a way in which if there's so many hypotheses that could potentially answer instead of the actual resurrection being the case. Because once you say resurrection, I know Christians go, you're avoiding the obvious Occam's razor. He rose from the dead. Duh. No, we're saying look at the hundreds of other miraculous deifications in antiquity with ascension narratives, clouds, dark day, earthquakes, the whole nine, like Jesus. Like, we're saying you don't think those are true. The authors who say, hey, I'm conveying this, like Livy, like what we're talking about, Halicarnassus, they're saying like, these are legends. These are not this, like, we're going to tell you this fable that is said about these guys. We don't believe this is what happened. And then they give reason. But I'm saying maybe he did that. And the other question I have for you, and this is the burning one. You ready for this one, Rick? Would they really die for something they know isn't true?
Well, okay. So I think this goes back to the whole idea of ascesis and martyrdom. And I think we can, what were the seven, the martyrs during the Maccabean revolt dying for? Truth to power. What did John the Baptist die for? Truth to power, right? Calling out. See, these were stunts in front of highly powerful people. And that's what we see as the pattern. It's not just people dying in obscurity out in the middle of nowhere or this kind of thing. It's people, it's early Christians aggravating, antagonizing, and this kind of thing. But it is interesting if you get to 1 Corinthians 15, what's the list there? The 500, okay, they're nameless. Let's push them off the table. That's never repeated again. Like, no one talks about the 500 who saw him. Like, no one, like 0 people, 0.00 people are talking about that. And but the rest of his list there of named individuals, you've got Cephas, you've got a variety of other disciples, and then finally you've got Paul, right? And then last of all, he appeared to me as one untimely born or whatever. Well, who are these people? These are the cult leaders. What a coincidence that it's the same people that happen to be at the very top controlling the narrative and running the cult, that happen to be the same ones that are in fact the eyewitnesses for this particular tale. And so it would be, and going back to Matthew, that the disciples came and stole the body. The disciples in Matthew, that's his close disciples. That's not just anyone. That's his inner circle. When he went out and picked the 12 at the beginning of the narrative, it was those guys. Right. And so, I assume that Peter, and all the, he was probably right at the forefront of that. And so when he gives his confession, who do the people say that I am? You are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That is a demigod. And so he, the Petrine tradition there is to definitely see Jesus exalted within that paradigmatic structure. And so,
Dr. Dale C. Allison Jr. in his resurrection book that I read talks about, he goes through a list of scholars with different views, and he didn't go into he doesn't touch everything you just did in this whole episode so far, but he did say there is a scholar who thought that the disciples would have stolen the body and said he rose and still stuck to their mythic topos, because that was how did John Dominic Crossan said it in a debate years ago against a Muslim. He said, if Muhammad existed in the 1st century and he was not a son of God, your guy would have been booed and hushed off stage, thrown out by tomatoes. They would not have given two whats about this guy if he was not a son of God, because that was the game in the town at the time. If you weren't a son of God, get your guy out of here. We want sons of God. And so the point I'm getting at is, like, you don't have this narrative that's fitting in the topos. It doesn't fit within the broader cultural context of your guy going missing and meeting the Hall of Fame status. It isn't going to work. So you need that to be your narrative for it to work in the Roman world. And guess what? It eventually was successful. They just kept nailing it down, and eventually it stuck.
Right.
But he thought that the reason that they stole it was so that, like you said, in a way, it hints at this, that they did not want to go back to being fishermen. If you take the story in the Gospels that they were really fishermen and they had to labor, and now you have Tiberius up here ruling this lake, and it's no longer the Sea of Galilee, but run and being taxed and being controlled, they're like, dude, we don't want to go back to that hard lifestyle. People are paying us to come talk to them about our particular cult. We don't need to work anymore. We have everything being fed and given to us. Look at Corinthians. I mentioned this before I even brought you on. Paul talks about you feed them and they're married and they have all this stuff. But I'm not asking for money. Come on, man. I don't know.
I think that, I think there is that kind of fraudulence, that aspect to it, but also there was a sincerity. They believed in this way. They believed in their teacher. They believed in their master. They believed in the philosophy that he was giving them. They were his students. And it was upsetting. Can you imagine how visceral it'd be to have your guru killed and executed by the power structures of the time? And they probably looked hard at that. And this, I mean, as this was going down, and they probably looked hard at that and said, you know what, we've got a chance to steal this guy's body. Screw you guys. We're going to take his body and we're going to say he's better than all of you. He's exalted better than your entire power structure. And this is where we're going with this thing. And that, to me, that makes, I mean, you want to talk about Occam's razor, that makes a whole heck of a lot more sense.
Right.
That hypothesis, now I can't go back there and prove it, but I can prove, I think my book does prove that he didn't rise from the dead historically. That's off the table. So at this point, then we've got to put together an alternate hypothesis if we're even still interested in the topic, which is to me peculiar, because no one's, we're having this discussion right now. No one's talking about what happened to Apollonius's body. No one's fussing over that or having to, combing through whatever little bits of data we can find in order to come. No one's losing sleep over that. No one's losing sleep over whether, if you were to go in the ancient world into the Temple of Pericles or whatever, and go in there and ask the cult leader in there, the priest or whatever, did Heracles really rise from that fire, ascend to heaven? Did that really happen? And he would probably broadly smile and say, of course, my son, have a seat. And there would be no big historiological kind of puzzle to unpack there. The idea was to immerse you in the cult, and that's what's misconceived right now. Okay, so people are going back into this and thinking, oh, they stole his body and it's this big fraud. No, it's not. Everyone understood what this meant. They were exalting him. They couldn't find his body. Okay, well, that's just like everyone else too that got it in my list of 100. And so they're putting him right in there. They might be kind of, manufacturing it in a more deliberate or forced way in that sense, if going with some of these hypotheses. But in the end, though, what they're doing is they're just trying to install him into that. He'd gone through a very ignoble kind of execution, a brutal execution, if that's historically correct at all, and it was undeserved. I'm sure his disciples didn't think it was deserved. It's interesting, though, that he said he set his face like flint, so he knew he was going to Jerusalem to die. Jesus himself, according to the text, was a bit of a stunt man.
Is he? Yeah, I was wondering. Peregrinus, right? Here we are again.
Yeah.
Quick question. I want to get into these super chats. I really, really want to try and do that before I let you go, if that's possible. Can I get you to hang around for just a moment?
A few more minutes. Yeah, I've got you.
Okay. So the other problem is Derek's got a tinkle. That's right. I got to go potty, as we say to the kids. So I need to show your book. Can you tease people for like a minute while I go use the restroom real quick? What is the book about, and why is this so controversial? Let's just go with that.
Yeah, I have a feeling it'll be a very fast tinkle. So I wrote this. This is back in 2014. I originally had written my first paper here in support of this was in 2002. And so very early. Some people get the timeline wrong. I was actually, I think, kind of the original guy with a lot of this, at least putting it together in this kind of cohesive way. I gave a paper in Boston at the Society of Biblical Literature in 2008, and basically showcased, and that paper became kind of the core thesis behind the article that I published in JBL in 2010. So Mark's Empty Tomb and other translation fables in classical antiquity. Basically, it's me trying to, my initial kind of shot at unpacking this argument. It was an honor to publish the article. I had actually an editor come up during the Boston presentation and ask me, hey, can you publish this in JBL? I found out later that I'm the only grad student that's ever published in JBL. And so it was a great honor. I didn't realize at the time it just showed though that there was a deep interest in these topics, and largely not really well trodden at all in the past, and largely misunderstood and by prior academic efforts. And so this book is basically just fleshing that out further. It's unpacking the arguments more deeply. It's dealing with some of the complexities and how it was received in earliest Christian texts. Start the first chapter with dealing with Justin Martyr and how he's having to deal with this particular topic. He goes ahead and admits that Jesus is doing nothing new. What we did with this narrative, and he uses we, he's talking about the entire Christian writing kind of world, the leaders of the entire Christian movement. He says, we've presented nothing new than what you present regarding the sons of Zeus. And then he unpacks that in terms of the translation, eyewitness tradition, and the whole thing there. And that's in First Apology 21.
There's so much too that I started learning about Justin and what he's doing, even in that debate that I was telling you about between who copied who. Did Plato copy Moses or Moses copy Plato? And of course he goes with the typical Josephus and the rest of like Apollodorus, the Jewish educated Jewish elites and stuff that were saying that Plato must have copied Moses. But he's still situated in, like, while he's dealing with these Platonists, he's actually using it kind of like, well, listen, we're not that much different. Our guy's the guy, though. You guys are just missing a little bit here. He's literally co-opting in a way, but just trying to go, but we really have the right guy, kind of like what you talk about in your book. And it's the same thing as saying, look, we believe nothing different from what you guys are believing here, but our guy is superior. So he's not denying the superiority of his Jesus, but he is saying we're in the same vein. And so that confession is there. I just don't know why the denial, other than they know what this means in terms of the overall. If we're approaching this today with criticism, we're cautious to not swallow what we see and believe. And we go, but did these guys actually do that too? It's the same problem I found with work done right now by Craig Keener. I've been hearing through the grapevine. I haven't read it myself, but the way it sounds is one of the criteria I mentioned to my buddy Caleb Jackson was just like, hey, one of these criteria, I see something that sounds and looks kind of fictitious. It looks exaggerated. It looks a little over the top to be what really happened. He's like, that's not a good standard of criteria. If you're someone who believes these fictitious sounding things are what happened, and these miraculous claims that happen all the time, you're going to sit here and think that what I'm saying is not making sense or it's not true. But then if you add the layer that, like, take the angel releasing Paul from prison in Acts, if you take that and you go, that just sounds like an earthquake causing them to, like, be freed from this thing, sounds fictitious, sounds a bit like a literary trope or something, then they're like, nope, that's not a good criteria. But if you find that it's in Euripides Bacchae that Dionysus is released from prison, and it, like, literally by divine help, that gives you an antecedent to fictitious literature. And this is what your book does that I think so good. When you find over and over common elements, themes, literary antecedents, mimesis, if you will, whatever, and you find that in this literature, why are you favoring this and saying this one actually literally historically happened and then denying that the others didn't? You might as well just start saying, listen, demons did those, but ours was done by God. And even then it's silly sounding, but at least you're trying to be consistent, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge is so I consider myself an academic, a scholar. I'm held to those standards. People are reading my stuff. they hold me to standards in the academic world. I can't just write anything and get away with it.
Right.
I had probably 20 people involved in this book. It wasn't just me off in the corner, like just kind of spitballing, whatever I thought. I had all sorts of, and so I'm held to peer review standards, heavy peer review standards with some top people. When you're an apologist, you're not held to those standards. In fact, a lot of those guys are going back into the text and just mining them for ammo. They're looking for polemical ammo. They're not there to try and understand what Justin really meant, or an authentic grasp of what was really going on. They're in the middle of a feud, and they're just reaching for whatever kind of ammo back behind them they can grab and put it into the chamber and fire it. And so that's problematic, because it's not a genuine effort to really understand and appreciate where these people are coming from, and to see them, warts and all, to see the issues and what's really at stake for the early Christians. That was my effort. I wasn't trying to disprove Christianity. I'm really not the enemy of the apologists. They see me that way because it just so happens that my conclusions that I draw are offensive to them, but I'm not trying to offend them. That was my research, where it landed after looking at all the data, took me right to that place. And I was very concerned to write it correctly, to make sure, because I know that if I didn't write it correctly, it would just get torn to pieces in 10 years, thrown in the waste can. I want this book to be something that's valuable for the next century or longer. And so, I was meticulous, and I brought to bear on it the right people. The top classicist at Cambridge University was on my dissertation committee, and so I had some serious people involved with this, and that's because I wanted it to be correct. I wasn't trying to trash a religion or anything like that. And in my opinion, if the religion got off the ground originally without having this hard historical kind of case, then it must have had other merits that appeal to people. And maybe those other merits should be the same merits that are held today by the religion. Maybe some of that praxis, some of that dedication to love your enemies and love, and treat other people with respect, and humility, and some of the other virtues that are brought forward, caring for the weak and the outcast and the other. Maybe those are that's the treasure in the religion, got it off the ground to begin with. And as I go back into study of the religion, that's exactly what got it off the ground. Those were the things that made it so compelling. It wasn't this big historical case with apologists running around, right, talking about the 500 who saw him, and just driving that home constantly. You just don't see it. And so if you go back and read Justin, it's uncomfortable for modern apologists. They don't even go back there, and they don't even want to read it, really, I don't think, unless they could find some ammunition in there, but pull out some little excerpt or something. But to actually I would challenge the apologists that are watching this, go back and read Justin and feel the texture of his thought, and realize you're in the same tradition you're supposed to be, but you find yourself in disagreement with him. He was born in the 1st century at the foot of Mount Gerizim. He had a front row seat to all of this stuff.
So you just want to sin. That's pretty much my takeaway. Let's go to the super chats here, because we're going to be losing Dr. Miller. In fact, he has an appointment with an apotheosis here soon. And I'm going to make sure I go over and make sure your body's missing. Don't worry. We will venerate you, my friend. Constellation Pegasus, can I request you have Ben Stanhope, Josh, and Adair on the same show going over I think he means over the flat earth and dome cosmology in Genesis? I'd happy to touch on that again, but with Ben, with Josh, and Adair. So Aaron Adair is a scientist. Josh is an ancient Near Eastern scholar, and he's written a lot on the Bible. Ben Stanhope's also written a lot on the Bible and has delved into this and taken prods to William Lane Craig on many issues pertaining to these things. So, I'd be happy to do that. I just would need to reach out to the three, and I'm sure we could make something happen for sure. Can you remind me on Messenger? Because I know you're on Facebook. Message me, remind me, please, because my life is in shambles. I'm trying to keep it together. Constellation again says, know anyone, Derek, you can have on showing that mankind is older than 6,000 years and cities dated over 6,000 years also. as far as cities go, I would need to think about who I could have on that would maybe talk about civilization that goes way back. But I do have Guts at Gibbon, who's a primatologist, a PhD, is almost in at the moment. I could have her on. We planned on doing a show anyway at some point this year, so I'm hoping I can get her on. Constellation, again, thank you, my friend. Joseph in Ridgeway, do you have a creation story that you value? Do you have a creation story that you value, Rick?
That I value?
That you value.
You know, I'm a big fan of science. I'm sorry. I really love what's going on with James Webb, and so the creation story that we're creating from scientific evidence is the one that excites me the most. But beyond that, though, I think some of the demiurgos, the tradition that came from Plato, it gets pulled up a little bit into Christianity with John's prologue there with the Logos creating. But this idea of having a demiurge from the creator that created all things, apanta, you know, that's a fascinating topic. And so if you like reading Platonic philosophy, and I do, so that's an interesting, they're making an effort at speculating on what happened and trying to put a kind of philosophical wrapper or rigor around it. And Plato, it's inherited from Plato. And so I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, the Timaeus.
Some of the Native American traditions as well, I think they're worth looking at. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I would just say I'm with you. I think it's, at the time, it was the most rigorous scientific creation account was Plato on the scene, as far as we could tell, you know, what he was attempting to do. And, you know, I got to go with Genesis. I mean, I understand I'm a critic, but like, I do, it's my favorite when it comes to it because I know it so well compared to the others. You know, I enjoy some of the other myths as well, going into Mesopotamia, dealing with the Enuma Elish and other things. There's some fun stuff there, especially if you immerse yourself in it. But I'm with you on the Plato thing too, because it's the most advanced for its time, trying to be scientific. Gods don't lie. Gods don't have passions like humans. This is a cool kind of concept to try and put the gods outside of the human realm where we saw them before. Thank you so much, Joseph. Apollo's Christian Apologetics. Hey, Derek, I saw your comment you made on Nahoa's Life channel. I don't know him, but Sean McDowell showed he's got a future in this field if he chooses. I think so. I actually texted him earlier because I have his communication there. He interviewed Robin Faith Walsh, Rick, and he actually did a good job having conversation and trying to dig and get her thoughts on things. But he's young. He's like 15 years old and sharp, very sharp. I hope he continues and researches. I told him on the phone one time, I said, listen, the more, if you're like a believer on the side that you really believe, the more you dive into this, if you're doing it from a historical critical approach, the less your confidence is going to be in that whole, this is what actually happened and it's true. And it becomes harder to really say what you can know happened or didn't happen because it's hidden behind theology and legend and it's literature. How do you know what happened? You know, so that was my little advice, kind of saying like, here you are, you little genius. He's super smart 15-year-old. So
it's true. It's true. I think one thing that's a kind of a false equivalency, you know, they have their scholars, we have our scholars, that whole thing. Well, what I've seen is I haven't seen atheists get into like the study of Christian origins and get converted to Christianity. I haven't seen that. There might be one out there somewhere. I don't know who they are. It's just not a thing, really. That the more you study it, the more you become convinced. You know, this kind of thing. But I've seen countless people that have gone the other direction. They get into Christian origins and then whoa, okay, wow, I didn't expect. I'm one of those, and it just has a tendency to disabuse you of all that. It gives you a much richer understanding, though, of just the human experience and why humans even create sacred stories and what we're up to as a species. And so it is a very enriching thing. It's not just all loss. Oh, I lost my faith. I lost my faith, yeah, but I gained so much more about what it means to be a human being and to be part of that. And so I hope the best for Sean McDowell. That's exciting to see, especially given his legacy there and where he's coming from with his family. And so hopefully everyone's on their journey, right?
I love the way you've worded that. That it wasn't from the outside, we look just so bad to the apologist, to the one that's really like a fundamentalist. We look so bad, and we're doomed and hell. It's really an ugly bubble that they live in, because I lived in it, and I know you lived in it. Me and you've talked about this we endlessly, but the world has broadened the walls and like boundaries between our tribe and their tribes, kind of things, like have broken down for me significantly. We have that natural inclination of tribalism there because it's just what we are as primates. But I'm saying, though, the world is bigger. I could go to India and value a Hindu temple and be respectful of the people's traditions and not even think those are demons and Satan's here and their worship or whatever, be mocking and scoffing, just like I do with Christianity. But I also see it in the same vein as all the other religions. It's a human thing. So love the way you put that. Thank you, Apollos, for the super chat, my friend. What's your take on Sophia and the God-man? Do you have a thought?
I don't. I don't understand the question.
It sounds like a Gnostic thing. So I honestly don't have an opinion specifically on it, and I don't really know where to go with it. Joseph,
yeah, I remember some of that from my Gnostic studies with Sophia, kind of the personification of wisdom.
Right. I mean, let me put it this way. As someone who you can put labels on me, whatever. I don't live my life looking at everything as like atoms bouncing off each other as a purely scientific lab kind of thing. I live and experience awe and wonder and mystery and narrative. We construct meaning along the way. I get it. I love fiction. I love the stories we make and construct, because life is like that. And so Sophia being this thing of wisdom, when I find a moment in a song or a word of wisdom to someone who's struggling and they needed to hear something, I don't know, I'm interpreting this super chat this way because I just figure, as someone who's a skeptic, you know, you get like us versus them kind of mentalities. And I tend to just say, I can speak the language. Christians will talk about it and say, you know, I'm praying for you. My mom will say, Derek, I'm praying for you and Jesus loves you. I know what my mom means. Okay, I know what she means, even though I don't in any way connect those dots. She's pretty much saying, I care for you, I love for you, and I want the best for you. That's how I interpret it. I take this as her saying, that's her mythic cult kind of perspective of saying, I love you and I want what's good for you. Someone else might say something else like, inshallah, through the Muslim tradition, and they mean well for me or something. Respect. I don't have this weird, like, I cannot believe you said Jesus' name. How dare you? Huh, I'm an atheist. Don't you know this? Like, you know, those kind of things. So Sophia and the God-man, I could find myself thinking like a Gnostic. Go watch The Matrix, for example, and get lost in the mythos of the Matrix series. Am I running off from the super chat here? Probably. But I'm just saying, I saw something interesting. Lex Friedman did a podcast with a guy talking about how come Homo sapiens like outdid the Neanderthals. And the going hypothesis by the guy on the stream was humans, Homo sapiens, that we are the only primates that can construct in a group bigger than 50 based on a narrative. What made us beat them and the rest of the world in terms of conquering the planet that we live on is we have formulated a group cohesive around a story. It can be made up. It can be true. It does not matter. The story made us come together and we conquered. Whereas Neanderthals...
Hey, Derek, I must drop, my friend.
You got a head?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, brother.
Yeah. She whom I must obey has called.
I do not blame you. Okay, I do not blame you. I love you, man. Hey, hit me up.
Love you too, brother. Take care.
All right, brother.
Good
Peace.
Take care.
I think I went on a rant there, ladies and gentlemen, but you get my point, right? We tell ourselves stories all the time. The foundation of this nation, America, has its own mythos. And you could say nationalism and patriotism play a significant cultic practice within the narrative structure that we have in America. American. I see that even in me. I have certain patriotic tendencies. My father was Green Beret in the Special Forces, and I was raised in a military household. So I have these natural inclinations to be a certain way. And I don't fault myself for it, but it's how I was raised. So I don't know why I ran with that with Sophia, but I think of Sophia as like, it could be interpreted in many ways of something wise in your life, whatever practice you come from. So the God man, I don't know why I thought of Friedrich Nietzsche when you said that. I was thinking of Nietzsche's like perfect man. But anyway, moving forward, Constellation Pegasus, thank you so much again for the love and support. Isn't the zodiac in the Hellenistic era synagogues going against the second commandment? Interesting. Any idea when the zodiacs were put in them? That is a great question. I don't think a zodiac in and of itself would fit the don't do this, don't have graven images kind of thing, or any other gods or idols or anything like that. I don't think that, but if you look at some of those zodiacs, there are faces of Helios in the center of those jokers. I saw them on the ground when I went over there to Palestine. I saw the iconography and the names of God-fearers and, you know, the Jewish people. There's like even Hebrew and Greek inscriptions there, but there's the zodiac, images of animals. So the images of the animals aren't deities. They're not gods, but they are living creatures. So I don't know if that would go against it. But I can't imagine all Jews thought the same way in this period, especially diaspora out there in the Hellenistic world, away from central Jerusalem, the hub. I can't imagine that they would all condemn such things. But you see these zodiacs right there, even near Jerusalem, especially up in the Galilee. You can go to the neighboring town next to where Nazareth is located. There in Sepphoris, they have one. We saw it on the floor with James Tabor on his tour. So it's a good question to ask. I don't know the question is either or, but I would ask someone who might be, I would need to ask someone who'd be more aware of Judaism at the time and how they saw zodiacs. I personally don't know. It's a great question. Thank you. It's just me, Tapora. Does not, thank you for the super chat. Does not Jesus fit into the idea of the Hellenistic Stoic Cynic sage that Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus talk about? Several scholars think so. Even Richard Miller pointed out, like, you see kind of the theme of him like living day to day, similar to some of these famous greats of the Cynics and Stoics. Day to day, don't worry about tomorrow. Who cares about yesterday? We eat as we go. We'll pick food where we find it. Some of the sayings look very philosophical in that vein. I think so. Now, does that mean Jesus really did walk in those footsteps like that? Maybe. Does that mean that they constructed a Jesus character to look the way that is modeled by the greats of philosophy? Probably. Who knows, right? This is the problem. I'm figuring out what did and didn't happen. But I think there's good reasons to think what you're saying is in the right alley. So thank you for that. Okay, John Gear, good to see you, man. 185 viewers and only 63 likes. Smash that like button to help MythVision podcast. Let's get the algorithm gods paying attention to us. John, thanks for that help, man. It's been a while since I've done a live and since I've seen you. So I really appreciate the support. Big time. Thanks for everybody who likes this stuff, comments down below, even after the stream, share this stuff out there, get some attention going. It really helps. It's a free way of helping. There are other ways, of course, if you ever wanted to help, that you can do so. But John, you're the man. You've been around, OG from day one. Love you, man. Hidden Gnosis in the house. How's your YouTube going, man? Thank you so much for that big super chat. The biblical narratives are claimed to be in the genre of a history biography. When I compare them to Herodotus, Livy, and Josephus, they don't seem to be so. I feel like the more are similar to Ovid's metamorphoses clarify the genre they belong. Oh, this is a Rick Miller question. And thank you for this massive super chat, but I have done some interviews with him and I plan on doing more documentaries, the kind of documentary deep dives that I've been doing. Hopefully down the road, me and Dr. Miller will put some of these together. But he actually has taken, let me pull up for you here. All right, here we go. Debunkingchristianity.com, How the Gospels Became History, a review by Dr. Richard C. Miller. This was, let me put this up on the screen for everybody to see. In case you want to actually get a deep dive of what he thinks, it's super, super heavy. You can go to this link. I'm putting it in the chat right now for everybody. Putting it in the chat. But go and you're going to want to read this. The reason why is these are two greats in terms of scholarship. And Litwa, Dr. Litwa, David Litwa, for those who don't know, has written a book called How the Gospels Became History. And in this critique, Miller actually tries to pitch it in a way of showing, look, these aren't normal biographies. These aren't your typical run-of-the-mill biography you might find in Plutarch and other places. You might see elements of that, but he also is working off other scholarship to make his point. Let me pull that up and zoom in here. You could download it, by the way. That link I just sent, go there, download this. It was written a while back in the Journal of Higher Criticism that Robert M. Price actually hosts. I think it's from there. That's a whole nother story, but all the debacle that happened much later. So you go download this and you can actually see, but both guys think that the Gospels are full and loaded of mythology, loaded with legend and mythology. What Litwa thinks is that the authors are trying to say they're writing histories of what happened and biographies and such. So in a way, they're kind of duping the audience to make them think that they're writing this. I could be mistaken. It's been a while since I read what Litwa said there. But I know that Dr. Miller goes in and says, no. This is cultic literature. This is meant for those in the cult, in the group. And it's not histories, biographies in that respect. They're literally writing to believers so that they believe and continue to believe. So genre, I don't know if there's like a one kind of genre. There's a blend of categories that you find in the Gospels. And that's that link. I promise you, Hidden Gnosis, it's not a long read. Go read that and email me, message me, or add me on social media, message me on Messenger when I have a chance to hear what you think about it. Check it out. If you haven't read How the Gospels Became History, it's interesting because what Miller thought was that it's a great title because eventually the Gospels be understood as histories. But they weren't initially. That's his point. And so one thinks they're not histories to begin with, Richard C. Miller. Litwa thinks that maybe they're coining them off, but they're loaded with fantastic material that isn't history, but they're sprinkling in things, maybe trying to convince you or the reader that they are. I may be butchering some of this, so go read it for yourself, please. I wish he was still on here to give his own 2 cents, but because it's his work. It's what he publishes on, so he would know better than me. Maybe I can write him and have him give his 2 cents. I don't know. Constellation, again, another request. I'd like to see Josh give us some source material on the dating of Noah's flood to the population of the Sargonic Empire and show how the math does not work. Trying to reread this. On the dating of Noah's flood to the population of the Sargonic Empire. I can't imagine Josh would even think Sargon, who's like 2nd millennium BCE, Noah's flood. I'm having a hard time understanding this. Maybe you're saying exactly what I'm saying, that Sargon's way earlier than when Noah's flood narrative even shows up, unless you're saying taking the genealogies in the Bible, trying to trace back to when Noah would have existed. I don't know. But as far as the narrative itself is way later. Some scholars want to give it a Assyrian Empire. Most will say post-Babylonian exile. And then some might even flirt with the Persian Empire. I saw that we had Kip Davis in the chat. He flirts with this. This is what I love about Kip Davis too. He has ideas. He's a scholar. He learns and he comes up with things, but he's actually willing and open-minded to flirt with the ideas of Hellenistic period for some of the narratives. There's some good reasons to think some of this stuff, source material, may come from much earlier, but that composition of things, I tend to think there might be something going on in the Hellenistic period myself. So, but I don't want to put words in Kip's mouth either. If you can remind me, Constellation, on Messenger, this as well, along with your recommendation of having Ben Stanhope, Aaron Adair, and Josh on for the Flat Earth stuff, please do. Thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate the support. Studio, Dr. Miller, was Justin Martyr a henotheist? Thanks. By definition, so I almost want to pull it up for our audience. Let me pull this up here. Definition. So henotheism, Greek, one God, is a term coined by Max Mueller to mean devotion to a single primary God while accepting the existence or possible existence of other deities. I imagine he would be. And even the category of angels and daemons, having these supernatural figures, could fit that category. But an ultimate primary singular deity, of course, without a doubt. So it's one of those, I've even had scholars who think that they disagree over the definition of exactly what henotheism and polytheism, where that line is drawn. Because even in polytheistic systems, you might have a primary deity like Marduk, but there's several other deities that are significant in the pantheon. And so fuzzy, gray line. But as far as staunch monotheism, that definition changed and people started to have those ideas as time went by. You could say Muslims fit that category of a staunch monotheism, but even they have, genies and strange figures that fall in different categories other than human and God. Sorry, I rabbit trailed off there. I wish he was still up here to answer your question. I apologize. It's just me, Tipora, thoughts. Judaism and or Hellenistic Judaism, just after Alexander, is the precursor to what would morph into the sects and offshoots of Judaism and Christianity. Judaism, Christianity are Hellenistic. 100%. You go look at the Elephantine papyri, go see what they were doing down in Elephantine and how they wrote to Jerusalem in Judea, and they asked for help to rebuild their temple in the 4th century BCE. They worshipped several deities. Ultimately, their primary was Yah, and they had other gods in this temple. And Jerusalem did not say, no, we will not send you funds because you have a different temple than we do, which is a Deuteronomy law. So you have to ask yourself, was Jerusalem practicing the law in Deuteronomy? Was that even a law that was known in Jerusalem in the 4th century BCE? I know it sounds radical. This is what some of the guys like Russell Kamirkin, Philip Vajenbaum, some of the more minimalist Thomas L. Thompson, stuff like that say. But I personally do think what we see as Judaism, Hellenistic, variations of that Hellenistic with more radical sectarian groups to full-on Zeus is Yahweh, that kind of thing. I think that's Hellenism onward, Alexander the Great onward. And archaeology is showing that. With Jonathan Adler's work, he's saying the biblical Judaism that we see practiced, there is no evidence before the 3rd century, I think it was, BCE, of this being practiced. And he might have said 2nd, but we can't show any hard evidence of it being practiced before that time period. Now, I know absence of evidence isn't necessarily proof, but there's good reasons to think that we're on the right track with pinning that beginning of actual biblical Judaism. Because before that, you have several gods in Elephantine. Jerusalem's giving these guys a thumbs up and sending them money to rebuild their temple down there. What the heck is going on? One can try to come up with any way to get out of it. Well, they were disobeying the commandment in Jerusalem at that time, and so they shouldn't have sent them money in support. They shouldn't have helped them because they had several deities. They were already breaking several of the biblical laws and things like that. You can come up with anything, I guess, but all roads are leading to Rome. 1.4 gigahertz Mac. Please remove all carrier courses from Patreon. Erman, Kip, Gnostic Format have said he's a liar, unqualified, should not be taken seriously. Promote good scholarship. Call out bad scholars. Please remove carrier courses from Patreon. I have several interviews that I've done with Richard Carrier. Shoot, I have interviews with Bob Price, and I will not have him on my channel anymore. And there's a recent debacle that happened. I'm not even going to get into about this. The guy is 100% closed off to reason on these things, but I'm not taking down those interviews. So, I have them in the past. As far as I'm concerned, they are history. You can go back and see them, but that's the best we got. As far as the whole debacle that's going on, I disagree with Carrier on several things, especially Jesus mythicism. I am not a Jesus mythicist, but I'm not interested in going out of my way and removing stuff like that. I understand that you don't agree with him. You think he's wrong on this, and I think he's wrong on mythicism. But yeah, I'm not going to go down that path of trying to block him, cancel him, like all that stuff. No, I do appreciate the super chat. And I think we are promoting good scholarship on MythVision. So thanks. Appreciate it. Justin Beaver, would you agree that religion and nationalism were one and the same in the ancient world? I can't say always, because I imagine what we call religion manifested differently in different ways. But if you go back to Mesopotamia, Sumerian, where it starts in Sumer in Egypt, it does look very nationalistic in the sense that the original mythos that they have that are being put on these clay tablets, you go back really, really far and you find Adapa myths and stuff. They're all about kingship and how they brought from chaos, like kind of the thing we see the demythologized form in Genesis. From chaos, these kings bring order, laws, and civilization and stuff. And so the gods and the king are like one and the same. There is no division between like politics and religion and these kind of things. They're all blended in to the mythos. There's a really wonderful interview by Digital Hammurabi with Joshua Bowen. Megan Lewis is the one who's interviewing Seth L. Sanders. And Seth, Dr. Sanders, who wrote a book called Adapa to Enoch, and then something else, the book title goes. But he says what's really interesting is that later on, when kingship is gone, like Persian rulers are knocked out, there's none of that happening. The Jews, who are actually adopting some of this myth, and he thinks in the Persian era, that they become the kings. They are the priests. They are the ones who adopt that position that real national kings of nations had. It's a very interesting thing to think about. But I imagine before writing these civilizations, some form of what we think of as religion probably existed. Probably in tribalistic smaller packs instead of national ones, but there was some form of it. Guarantee you, with probably some alpha figure. They were probably very patriarchal, I imagine, just like we look at, primates in nature. And that's my kind of perception. As I've been looking into it, a lot of it is animalistic and polytheistic, and they call it animism and some forms of this. So I don't know. I'd love to dive deeper into really prehistory beliefs and practices and how that worked, but it all fascinates me. Thank you for the super chat. I hope that answers your question, but we're still doing it today in politics and everything. It's so us versus them. Daniel Whitaker, thank you for the being a member for so long, 12 months. Like the stream. Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate the love and support. I'm popping back over here because I went into the Starred, which is on StreamYard. It helps you now. I can find your super chats and not have to dig and worry about, did I miss anything? And I'm just scrolling up to see if I missed anything important. If everybody's being good, behaving with your best behavior in the chat. Okay. Studio, you're welcome. You're welcome, my friend. Thank you for the support. Appreciate the super chat. I'm scrolling through here. Well, Mark, you bring up something interesting. The solution: reduce it to mythology, expose the truth. So for me, if your interpretation model is literal, then yeah, it's going to blow your mind when you realize that you've been duped. And that's what it did to me. What's happened to me over time, I had a chip on my shoulder, and maybe still do in some ways. I mean, let's be honest. I'm sure we all have our bias and have critiques and issues with what we think are harmful or even bad ideas. But ultimately, it's kind of like I'm fitting this category of genre. I'm starting to look at the Hebrew Bible. I'm not kidding when I say this. We just talked about nationalistic ways. The way Homer impacted the Greek world and how Homer's literature, the Odyssey, the Iliad, sprinkles of verisimilitude, what the classicists called realism, real people, real places, real things, real regions and lands and seas and all of this stuff. There's some realism there, but it's extremely fictional. It's narrative. It didn't literally happen in several ways. We found what we think is Troy, but did the wars described and detailed in there happen the way that they've been accounted? Probably not. I mean, in one account, Heracles goes after and destroys Troy. My point is, I see a lot of similarities between Homer's Iliad, the Odyssey, and things like that, and what I'm seeing in the biblical literature as well. You could also find ancient Near Eastern stuff like this, but once you start reducing it to that, you can actually appreciate and value literature. Chew the good stuff, spit out the old, see what's dated. You know what? They had actual indentured servitude. They had actual slaves owned for life, sex slavery, this kind of stuff. We should stop that. This is no good. This is a dated idea. This is just no good. But that was ubiquitous in many ways in the world. The Greeks did this as well. The Romans did this as well. My point is, you start to, get outside of that and realize it's just ancient literature. And it doesn't have that effect on you anymore. But I value it. I enjoy it. I like to learn from it. My thoughts. So some people probably will always have a chip because there's so much trauma that's happened to them in the faith or in their particular group. For me, I think most of the trauma that happened to me was internal due to the psychology of Paul and hating the flesh and not being able to live life without hating it or thinking I should. If you love this life, you're going to lose it to come. And if you hate this life, you're on the right path because you need to store your treasures in heaven. Don't worry about the things of the earth, that kind of stuff. And I struggled my whole Christian, I try to take it for real, serious. And when you do that, you end up in a bad spot when you start figuring out what you've been believing doesn't seem like it is the truth. There's several truths. And you start going, holy smokes. Lots of claims out there. Why do I think this one? And then you find contradictions and problems amongst the literature. Things don't add up. Something isn't clicking. Why am I going to be dishonest with myself and believe in something that not only doesn't seem to add up and make the most sense, but also is like not working in my life? Anyway, rambling. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Seriously, appreciate that. Scrolling up here. Constellation. Man, you're dropping bombs on me here. I really appreciate the love. Another request. Some people argue that Lilith is not mentioned at all in the Hebrew Bible. It's due to that language being so ancient. There's debate if she's in there. I'd like to see an episode about that. I don't think Lilith appears in the Bible, in the canon that we are looking at, but it is like absolutely in the lore, Jewish lore, that Lilith shows up. But back to Seth L. Sanders, Adapa to Enoch, he highlights that Lilith is actually the Jewish kind of 2.0 of an earlier demon god, not a demon goddess, but a demon god, I believe it was. It might have been a goddess. Let me pull up the statue. I think I have it in my Enoch video, actually. If you haven't watched that Enoch documentary that I made, you really, really should, because I actually cover this and show you the visuals and everything from Seth L. Sanders. Let me pull up. It is in my Origins of the Bible series. Bear with me 1 second. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Let's check this out together. Centralized figure, heavenly revealer. Both groups. Let me scroll up here. Bear with me. Explaining the divine revealed secret. Scrolling up. We got to find this, everybody. We're going to do it together. This is the Enoch documentary. While this plays, I'm going to actually, in the midst of this rich jumble, one figure emerges as a hero in the face of Lamashtu's malevolence, Adapa. Revered in their tradition, Adapa possessed the rare ability to ward off the menacing demon, illustrated in a remarkable plaque during the 9th and 7th centuries BC. We witness the sage Adapa adorned in an attire reminiscent of a fish, valiantly protecting patients or expectant mothers from the demon's harm. Delving into the complex depths of ancient Mesopotamian lore unveils a world where scribes rose to prominence, demonic forces loomed, and heroes arose to confront them. It is a testament to the intricacies of historical narratives, where the interplay of power, mythology, and cultural belief shape the collective consciousness of civilizations. But still lurking in the air is the intriguing question at hand, revolves around the interactions between Judean scribes and Mesopotamian traditions, particularly considering the striking resemblances between the narratives of Adapa and Enoch. Both figures emerge as a celestial messengers, hailing from primordial times, and both become personified by scribes. Despite the lack of extensive verbal overlap between the two, scholars have noted profound structural parallels, prompting further exploration into the potential connection between Enoch and the earlier Adapa myth. It is noteworthy that both Mesopotamian and Judean societies underwent similar transformations, including the loss of native kingship and the conquest by the Persians and Alexander the Great. In both contexts, scribal cultures experienced comparable changes. Professor Jonathan Ben Dove has drawn attention to the remarkable similarity between the astronomical knowledge present in Enoch and the astronomical knowledge associated with Adapa in Mesopotamian literature. These conceptual affinities, though distinct, beg the question of how they can be connected. During the late Persian period, the same individuals held positions of power in both institutions, namely those who controlled the temples and education. Okay. So let me show you what I found here. It is Lamashtu, the Lamashtu demon in ancient Sumerian or ancient Sumer and Akkadian and stuff. Let me share the screen and show you what this demon looks like. And I think it's this one. Yes, it is. Here we go. This is the demon that you can go ahead and say evolves later in Jewish lore into Lilith. And of course, they construct a narrative according to what I was reading from Seth L. Sanders. If you see this person laying on this table right here, let me try and stretch this out. Oops, sorry. This person laying on the table with the little fish gods or whatever, down below, I think this is the demon Lamashtu, but it's really this demon that comes after women who are giving birth, so newborn children. It's almost like today when children die of SIDS, where they're like, how did they die? What happened to them? Mothers giving birth, they would pray. That this is like an amulet, actually. I think some ancient like amulet to ward off Lamashtu from killing the newborn child. And this is just one of those kind of interesting artifacts that we discovered with these deities and ancient inscriptions on them. But I think it's Lamashtu. Like, I would not bet my life on it, but in this video, which we don't have time to like rewatch, The Origin of Enoch Will Blow Your Mind, which almost has 1 million views. It's the #1 viewed video on my channel right now. I actually cover this and go into it. And this is, my recollection is the image here of the Lilith demon. And it's always about like little children. So it goes after kids, according to that lore. There you have it. Constellation. But as far as going into the Hebrew Bible and like showing where the literature is about Lilith, I know there are rabbis who talk about it later, but there should be, and I cannot remember where that is. I could Google that real quick, actually. Google should have answers. So the Bible mentions the Lilith only once as a dweller in the waste places, Isaiah 34:14, but the characterization of Lilith, or the lily in the singular or plural, as a seducer or slayer of children has a long prehistory in ancient Babylonian religion, which I showed you the image to that. And that's what scholar Seth L. Sanders, and I imagine others in that, in the ancient Near Eastern studies and understanding that culture, would probably connect her to that. She began as a female demon common to many Middle Eastern cultures, appearing in the book of Isaiah, Babylonian Talmud, so later Jewish rabbis, and incantation bowls from ancient Iraq and Iran. She's described as threatening the sexual and reproductive aspects of life, especially childbirth. A medieval Jewish text called the Alphabet of Ben Sira describes her as Adam's first wife who betrayed him and God and asserted her equality to Adam. I heard a story that Adam wanted to be on top in the, but she wasn't having it. She wanted to be on top. And once you disobey your husband, I'm just saying, this is patriarchal system, of course. And so this is how they play the game. But it says her equality to Adam, giving a legendary origin to her demonic behavior. She also appears in Kabbalah as an evil reflection of the feminine aspect of God, along with Samuel. Interesting. I know Samuel comes up by the witch of Endor in one of the Old Testament narratives, could be summoned up. Jewish feminists, seizing upon her assertion of equality, have reclaimed Lilith as a symbol of autonomy, independence, and sexual liberation. So it's kind of like Satanist. You know how Satanists are Satanists? And you go, but do you believe actual Satan? No. There may be some fundamentalist Satanist believers or whatever out there. Most of them see Satan, like these feminist Jewish feminists, seizing upon her assertion. So they would see her as a symbol of autonomy, independence, and sexual liberation, the same way they see Satan is fighting against the tyrannical ruling of the deity Yahweh or El. And so they end up in this kind of group together, standing against, opposing the dictator called God. That's how a lot of Satanists kind of view it. Until the late 20th century, the demon Lilith, Adam's first wife, had a fearsome reputation as a kidnapper and murderer of children and seducer of men. Only with the advent of feminist movement in the 1960s did she acquire her present high status as the model for independent women. The feminist theologian Judith Plaskow's modern midrash on the story of Lilith played a key role in transforming Lilith from a demon to a role model. So it goes, Lilith in Middle Eastern literature. And this, I should show you the article. I'm over here reading it, and I thought it was up on the screen. So this is what I'm reading. I'll put it in there in case you want to check it out in the chat. But yeah, so Lilith in the Babylonian Talmud, the alphabet of Ben Sira, Lilith in Kabbalah, the feminist Lilith, and then bibliography. So there's sources you can go check if you're interested in following further. Lesson plan, Lilith evolved writing midrash. Interesting. But yeah, I could imagine she's been demonized, and, you know, I imagine men probably would throw that word around. Oh, you Lilith. I don't know. I've never read it, but it would not shock me if she became the curse word, if she became the derogatory slander toward women who just aren't taking your crap. So how many husbands do you think in history threw Lilith as the word at their wife? I bet you a lot. I bet you a lot. Anyway, fun, interesting rabbit trail there. You see what happens. I get lost in wanting to dive in and check this stuff out. So you should see my notes that I'm doing for these documentaries. I'm going to tease you here. I mean, there is no video. I can brag about this because I'm serious. I look through the internet, YouTube, to find stuff like what I'm doing, and nobody's doing what I'm doing here. Looking in the Greek world for those connections to not just New Testament stuff, the way that we're doing that, but in the Hebrew Bible, constructing the Hebrew Bible using Homer's Iliad, Odyssey, Herodotus. You might have some Athenian tragedy type poetry, Plato, like all of this. So my next video is on Plato, but the one after that is going to be on Jacob, Israel. And here's a little tease just to let y'all see. We got all sorts of diagrams here comparing parallels between Jacob, Heracles, Jacob, King David, Jacob, Israel, and Acrisius and Proteus. Like there's going to be some really, really good stuff that I've been doing. I really don't want to give you too much because I'm so excited, and the hard work that I've been putting into diving in and then sifting it and making it something that's digestible, because a lot of this stuff I'm reading is just, holy smokes, hard to chew and very deep, especially for me, because I've never just straight out read Homer's Odyssey or the Iliad. I've never read the Argonautica. I've never read Jason and the Argonauts. I've heard things about them. I've heard from scholars like Dennis MacDonald and other classicists about these Greek narratives, but I'm depending on their knowledge of it. And then when I start to read, and then they're taking you to the source and you're reading it and you're comparing it, you like, it's kind of mind blowing how much commonality between these sources are there. Now, take all of that I just said about there's commonality between the Bible, Hebrew Bible, and Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and then go to these ancient voices like Aristobulus and other Greek writers, Roman authors, Christian authors, pagan authors, as we like to call them, people who were in the school of Plato or Pythagoras or whatever, and they all agreed that these authors, Plato, these philosophers, Plato and Moses, are talking. Like, they think that Plato's copying Moses. And then you have Aristobulus, who thinks that there must have been, at some point, this is his rationalization, there must have been a Greek version or something of the Hebrew Bible for Homer. This is Aristobulus, 150, 160, somewhere around there, BCE. He's a Jewish intellectual. And he says, like, Homer has too much in common with the Hebrew Bible. Like, he had to have had a Greek translation. And some scholars to this day try to posit that the Greek world and their teachings and ideas somehow mingled with the Bible authors. they just don't know when and where, so they hypothesize. Russell Gmirkin and others say, we know when, and we have good reasons where. Hellenism. The Greeks conquered the world. So it wasn't that the Greeks borrowed from the Bible. It was that the Bible is being inspired by the Greek writings of the world. And I'll leave you with one little question that I have. Does the Bible source its mythical antecedents? Not that I'm aware of at all. Like, take the scholarship that shows in the ancient Near Eastern literature, you have the Gilgamesh epic, tablet 11, which Dr. Joshua Bowen and other ancient Near Eastern scholars have showed. Noah releases the 3 birds. This element is so clearly something that is lifted, intertextuality. There's something going on between the biblical author's knowledge of the Gilgamesh epic, tablet 11, where he releases the birds. Utnapishtim does. And he's releasing the birds, 3 birds. That is in the Bible. The Bible does not ever say, hey, we got this from, this Gilgamesh tablet. Scholars are pretty much unanimous on this is influencing. There's something going on and they're being influenced, but they don't credit them. The Greeks credit where they learn their stuff. In fact, you might think of it as like, oh, but they're going to give away their secret that they learned it from the Phoenicians or they learned it from the Egyptians. To them, it was a badge of honor to say, here's how much knowledge I've acquired from all of these civilizations in the world. But we're really making them one cohesive, wise philosophy that we're learning from all these places. And guess what? Plato never credits Moses, never credits the Jews, doesn't even mention them. Doesn't know of them. Herodotus never mentions them. None of the Greek authors ever mention these people in their book and their stuff. So I'm like, so are we supposed to believe that Plato and all these guys took these ideas and never mentioned that they got them from them? But they are so like upfront about mentioning they got all this stuff from all these places. And then we get to the biblical authors who don't source their stuff. And we're supposed to believe that the Greeks borrowed from the people that don't source their stuff and they don't source it. This sounds confusing. I'm probably confusing some of you, but the point is Greeks were happy to say, I got this from Bob. The Bible authors never tell you they got it, but it takes critical scholarship sifting through the material to see the antecedents. The Bible won't tell you. You have to find those clues. And scholars have found those clues, like Gilgamesh Epic, Tablet 11. So I'm saying, if the Bible doesn't tell who they kissed, but the Greeks always say who they kissed, I'm just saying, they would have said something. Greeks would have said something. They would have had no shame in saying it. But we don't see it. It's completely absent. Huge question mark and mystery. And I'm trying to dive in and show that I think that the Bible authors, the Hebrew Bible, not just the New Testament, is being influenced by Greek literature in many ways. So if you don't believe me, go read Bruce Loudon, who wrote a book called Homer, the Homeric Epics and the Near East. Let me pop this up. Homer's Odyssey and the Near East, Bruce Loudon. He passed away a few years ago. I highly recommend that. And Argonauts of the Desert, Structural Analysis of the Hebrew Bible by Philip Wagenbaum. And this is really persuasive to me. There's a lot going on here. It's building up, and the documentary series, I guess, will continue to unravel that. So, oh snap, we got Shannon Q up in the hizzy. What's up? Hope you're doing well, Shannon. Good to see you here. Oh, we got John Williams in here. What's up, John? Alexander the Great conquered the Middle East and never heard of Jerusalem his whole lifetime. He never mentions these things, which is curious. Like Herodotus, too. That's a big one. Father of histories. This guy had 9 volumes that he wrote about the world. And they don't appear anywhere. You're going to want to see Gnostic Informants coming up documentary. He's going to be trying to bring out some elements that Yahweh isn't just a storm deity, but there's a lot more going on. And it's going to be fun. I'm excited. I'm like, you know me, I'm a nerd. I love this stuff. and anyway, I hope you're enjoying this with me. If you're weird like me, then thanks for being weird. MythVision, you really believe the mythology of the Bible? Me, yes, I do. But it is history, not mythology. Well, if it's history, so is Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey for me. And I guess I would just start opening my mind to several other things in the world being true, you know. So I hope that you're having fun with me, everybody. Deb, good to see you on the Facebook side. Good show, sir. Thank you, Deb. It's been a while. He's dating your boyfriend. Well, me and Paul do have we tight. Shannon, okay. Hello. I'm just now coming back after my rant and seeing everybody's Shannon, you weren't supposed to tell everybody. Come on. What's up with that? So I'm going to call Paul when we get off the show here. No. Thanks for tuning in, though, Shannon. I really appreciate you coming in here and checking out what we're doing. It's been too long since I've done a live stream. I've been working. I helped my brother and his wife get treatment. They're struggling with addiction, which is normal. People have this, right? It's a real thing. I bet you we got 216 people watching right now. I can't imagine over 50% of us at least have someone that we love or have a family member who I guarantee you suffers with it. So it's a human thing. We all have someone. We might be suffering with it ourselves. You're not alone. Get help. Get medical help. Seriously. Go talk to someone. You're not alone. You can, life really does get better. In the end, we all go to the same place. That's my estimation. But enjoy the sunlight while you can. And there's no reason in living stuck in that. So I'm like this weird guy who likes talking about Bible, but also wants to inspire you to better your life and things like that. And I hope that seeps in. We have a friend here suffer with it. You're not alone. I promise you that. Don Johnson, MythVision, are you still friends with Pine Creek? I don't talk to Pine Creek. I have no interest at this point. So appreciate you asking. You're vaping too much. Where is that place, Derek? What place? Shannon, thank you for the hearts. Good to see the love in the chat. We're all humans. We're all humans trying to figure this thing out. Wow, there's a girl who sits through all this and can listen to this stuff. Shocking. I guess there's always going to be one. You know what? I mean, Shannon's pretty sharp. If I could pat myself on the back here, we do talk about some pretty intelligent stuff here. Shannon is somebody I actually look up to and learn about consciousness. She introduced me to, who was that scholar that I interviewed, you interviewed, particularly on the brain stem and consciousness and stuff. I cannot think right now. Anyway, if you haven't subscribed to her YouTube channel, you'd know why she probably is tuning in right now and saying, hey, it's mostly probably just the social love, but on some real stuff, Shannon's got some brilliant work over there that she's done in interviews. You got to check her out. Shannon Q. One has to want to quit. That's the problem. Wanting. That want, you get that little war, the wolf on both sides. You might want to quit now, but your mind will change, and then you gotta stick with it. It's really, really hard. It's not just as easy as you just want it, because you can really want it, and then 20 minutes later, withdrawal set in. Your entire persona and mind has changed. That's why I recommend professional help. Because it's totally normal, but it goes down into that reptilian brain of fear, fight, flight, and F. Can't say it on YouTube. They might demonetize me, but you get the point. All right. So we got a super chat. Shannon, neat misogyny. I hope you're not talking to me. I'm not, but I think it's talking about the person in the chat. Mark Soames. Yes. If you haven't seen Mark Soames write on consciousness, blew my mind. Literally told me the reason I was addicted to opioids and how that played into the brain science and stuff. And it has to do with love. You want to feel loved. Like, I'm like sitting on a confession seat here watching everybody hear him tell me the reason why, opioids really are something you cleave to is that you want to feel loved and you're missing that love. And there is some truth to that. I've pointed this out with my whole Jesus testimony when I was in church. That pastor that day, first of all, guilt tripped me about lies that I've said and how I had to lie about those lies to keep lying, but then said, there's a Father in heaven who will love you unconditionally. He sent his son down, like the whole spiel of the gospel. And I walked down to the altar and I accepted this heavenly Father who was perfect, because my dad struggled with alcoholism and was very aggressive and I'll say abusive, mostly verbal. There were moments where it got physical, but that heavenly Father, and man, it went deep. I'm a pretty open book here. So the transparency, I'm not ashamed of my life, my past, where I'm at, where I'm going, things like that. But yeah, brought back memories. Mark Solms. Thank you, Shannon, for bringing my brain when my brain stops working. Look, sorry, I can't focus on the chat. My girl brain is thinking about ponies. Thank you for the super chat and the love. Really appreciate it. Best video I've done and so not watched enough. Yeah, wow. So then your video with Mark, let me get this right. I'm gonna pull it up so that people can go over and subscribe. Bear with me. I'm about to call it quits here in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Please hit that like button. I need to go eat. And I'm sure that the queen of MythVision is probably going, okay, dude, you've talked enough hearing yourself, because I don't ever talk. Mark Solms. The source of consciousness. Okay, here we go. It's like, you understand this stuff better than me, Shannon. I don't know the science like you do on the brain, but the source of consciousness with Mark Solms, the hidden spring. Let me get you this. If you are ready to dive into some deep science, and he even gives graphs, what makes it so personal is Mark's own brother had brain damage, and like how that changed him as a person, technically how that changed his consciousness, really made him realize what is the source of consciousness. That's how I took him. And then he goes way in there about people who are missing like the cortex and still have awareness of infants. They're holding infants, if they're siblings, things. Blew my freaking mind. Thank you so much, Shannon, for being here and showing love. I hope people will subscribe. I posted it in the chat. Constellation Pegasus. Did any archaeologist find a VHS Cheech and Chong movie by that Israelite altar with the marijuana on it? I haven't dug deep into that, but they were burning marijuana incense on the altar. Drugs in the ancient world. They're escaping and going and getting higher. I remember a Christian that I was friends with at the time. We had a falling out later, but he used to say when he would smoke, he felt like he was getting closer to God and things like that. Look, I like the joke in the super chat, but that is something to be explored more. Just how ancients took these drugs and it helped them in their minds to get closer to the divine realm and things. It's interesting. In the Greek world, the books upstairs, Appos of Apollo and other things by like Carl Ruck, worth considering and looking into to understand how a lot of these things, like getting intoxicated on alcohol, they would see it as like a spirit, a daemon, or even a god entering into them. Worth looking into. Deb, you're one of the few in the fam, huh? You're a normie, as we call them. People who they don't have addictive issues. We call them normies. Oh. Someone with a super chat. Literally, someone. Please tell the story of going to confession every other day as a curious teen for your sins. You mentioned it briefly and it killed me. Okay, story time, everybody. I had hormones like out the yin yang, okay? I was a young kid going through puberty. I discovered these things called Playboy magazines. My father, who was a Green Beret in the Special Forces, gave them to me. He handed me condoms and he handed me Playboy magazines and he said, son, he'd be drunk and he'd be sipping his alcohol. We'll pretend the water is the alky. Son, you want to live forever? And I'd be like, yeah, Dad. Yeah. You just want to listen to Dad and you look up to him. Well, he says, what did he say? He says, never swim alone. No, he says, hold on, I'm trying to make this right. I want to make sure I have it phrased right. He said something like, never give a ball. He says, never swim alone. Always wear a condom. Never swim alone. Never give a dog a chicken bone. Always go to combat with a plan. Never use your tongue to stop a fan. These are the words he said. And he said, if you could do that, you'll live forever. He'd be like plastered. And he'd hand me these Playboys and hand me condoms and said, enjoy. So that was my world. Playboys led me into just the porn world. And, I'm a young kid and fascinated with sexuality and things like that. Then I become a Christian. And there's these texts and there's these look upon a woman with lust. And there's these things that, my flesh is bad. And, what's wrong with me? And I'm tiptoeing and dualistic fight inside myself of I need to do right and stop doing this. But like physically, I can't help my hormones that desire to want to do these things. Now, I wanted to paint the background. So here I am in 9th grade, 10th grade, going to high school. And there's this group called Trojans for Christ. Fun fact, in that county, our school was the #1 for teen pregnancy. And we were named the Trojans. Now, our mascot was a Roman, like a Trojan from like antiquity, Greek, Roman, Troy, the whole nine, right? So it wasn't about the condom thing, but I thought it was ironic. We'd go in there and there'd be like worship music and we would do the whole spiel of Jesus each morning. And I'd have a guilt trip because the night before, by myself, I'd watch pornography and do what young boys do with their lotion and their towel, okay? And I'd go down there and I'd ask them to pray for me. And they'd lay their hands on me and sometimes they'd be speaking in tongues. Sometimes they weren't speaking in tongues. And they would try to help that demon of lust, the spirit of lust, leave. And I'd feel better. I'd go to church, like go to school. We're in a public school where they allowed this little church group over here. This is in North Carolina, so it's in the Bible Belt. I'd go to school, be happy. Next day, I probably slipped up the next night sometimes. And I didn't want to go down that next morning because I'd be so embarrassed from going down and getting prayed over the day before. Like, what's wrong with you, dude? You can't just stop. And then I would go the day after the next day. And these people would look at me. I can't imagine what they would think. This guy's coming down to get prayed over. This like every time he turns around, he needs to be prayed for the same thing. What's wrong with this guy? This is what I imagine they're thinking. And then I noticed over the years, looking back, like how very few people ever got prayed over like that. And it must have been odd that I kept going down there to get prayed over and no one else had these problems. Like, you mean out of the 100 kids that were going through puberty with me weren't struggling with this thing? I find that hard to believe. But I was just not ashamed. Never was ashamed to just be like, yo, this is my problem according to what I believe. This is wrong and I need to be prayed for, because I was trying to be honest and really sincerely followed what I thought was the truth. And so many years later, I look back and go, holy smokes, they must have been going, is Derek going to walk down here today? I wonder if Derek's going to walk down here to get prayed over again today. I personally chalk it up to I was being honest. Sometimes my experience tells me that most people were probably taught by their parents. Not everyone needs to know everything, but I just was trying to be honest. And I imagine most of them aren't. I can't imagine. Now, that's me pushing my experience onto everyone else, but it's hard for me to believe that wasn't happening to every human. And so some people get embarrassed by these kind of conversations. I don't. It's completely normal and natural. I don't. At the time, I was embarrassed. It was the walk of shame to go down and say, I have a demon, and the demon's still there. For years, I did this. Went to Trojans for Christ for years. And then when it wasn't at school, it was at church when it was more of a charismatic kind of group. So once we got into Presbyterianism and Calvinistic stuff, we had gotten away from needing to go down to be prayed for and stuff, but we still tried to handle it. I had this program on my computer called Covenant Eyes for Men. Your pastor has access to any bad sites that you get on. It'll email them. Now, do you think that I ever went on that computer and did that? Hell to the no. I did not. Because I did not need him going, we need to talk, Derek. It just, no. It's toxic. The whole thing is just not a good experience. So someone, you now know, my friend, you now know the full skinny on the situation. And the reason you asked is because you're like me, aren't you? I hope that lets you feel like you're not alone, ladies and gentlemen. Like, I just hate to break it to you, but it's normal. It's completely normal. And I don't know. Maybe it's time to eat. What do you think? I think it is. Seriously, though, thank you for everybody who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed Dr. Richard C. Miller. We really dug deep into some stuff. I love that guy. I love just doing this stuff, and your hearts and likes and shares and comments and support means a lot to me. And I want to keep doing this. By the way, Shannon, I know you probably know, but maybe you don't, because Paul, picks up my phone calls, and you know how that goes. He's talking about having me on his program as a cartoon. So finally, I've become deified to a cartoon for Paul. Cross my fingers that happens. But it's in response to William Lane Craig bringing up Richard C. Miller and me on his podcast in passing. He brought up several other people, but it's to respond to some of the stuff that he said in that. So I got to prepare for that before we record on Tuesday. Looking forward to it. Oh, we got another one. Drugs for Robots. Are you familiar with Teilhard de Chardin, his idea of Christogenesis and the Omega Point? Food for thought. Much love. Appreciate work. I don't. I've never heard. I don't. Drugs for Robots. I need to look them up, but is there a way you can email me so I can go get some foods? I would definitely appreciate it if you could email me. William Lane Craig brought up Richard C. Miller and Derek. I've got to hear that. Yeah, it's on his podcast. Actually, Paul from Apologia, for those who don't know, I just call him Paul. He listens to William Lane Craig. And even he admits he knows he's a strange guy for that too. We all are in some way. But he said, dude, you got to check this out. You get brought up. Okay, I'm going to listen. And when I listened, I was like, this is really interesting. What he says is illuminating. And I can't wait to get into it with Paul. I love that guy. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. Joseph says, Derek could humble anybody because he's always grounded in logic and reason. Joseph, love you. Thank you for the kind words. I hope to be that way, but sometimes we all have our faults, and I'm probably irrational in ways. It happens, especially when emotion plays a part. But those are kind words. I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. Everybody, I'm out. I got to go eat. If I don't eat, I'm gonna hurt myself. I've been exercising, taking care of myself, trying to get work done. Got my brother and his wife help. And Yeah, I don't know what else to say, but let's keep kicking butt and taking names. Oh, one more important thing for everybody who's still here. We are MythVision. I love y'all. Have a wonderful evening.